It's time to talk about those three little words, the words that always make my heart sing every time I hear them, the words that make all the ladies' eyelids flutter, that draw sighs from the crowd. And of course, you know what three words I'm talking about. It couldn't be anything other than the three words arma, virumque, cano. Wait, those weren't the three words? What were the three words? I don't know any other three words that bring sighs and tears of affection and love from masses of ladies. No, I actually want to drill down into just those three words in this Words series episode about the translation of the Aeneid. So usually once a week, I like to talk about just the nuances of language and how we translate from one language to another, because it's something last year I realized like not a lot of people kind of know what the basic problems are here. And we all in some way or another deal with translation, whether it's because we're picking the edition of Dostoevsky we want to read, or because we have a buddy that is from overseas and we need to like learn to talk to one another. There's a million different ways that translation factors in. And actually, one of the things that I always want to stress is that even if we're speaking the same language, there are often problems of translation that we have to deal with, because language itself is always this imperfect tool that translates our inner thoughts and our inner feelings. So thinking about translation, especially in works of great art, can actually reveal a lot about this thing that we use every day, all the time, called language. And since we're doing a series in the main show about the Aeneid, I've been doing a little bit about the translation of the Aeneid from Latin. And last time I talked about all the different English translations of the Aeneid that we can look at and all the different possibilities. I have just received, like shortly before I started recording this episode, I got in the mail the lost C.S. Lewis translation of the Aeneid. Now, there's a lot of controversy around this, and I have to do some research and investigate, because I guess the claim is that this was found in a bonfire, like almost got burned, but Lewis had been working on a translation of Virgil, and this was saved and preserved. And there's also some argument that maybe this is not true. This is just an anecdote. It's sort of a self-aggrandizing thing by a later scholar. So I want to look into all of that, and I also want to talk about Lewis's so-called translation and whether it's any good. And I'm going to do another episode all about that down the line. So stay tuned for that. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. If you're watching on YouTube, just hit that subscribe button, or on Apple Podcasts or wherever. But today, I just wanted to talk about the translation of these first three words. And actually, I wanted to talk about them as translations in and of themselves, because I've stressed now that one thing Virgil is doing is he's taking Homer, a Greek poet, the great kind of original Greek poet whose epics kicked off Greek literature, and he's translating Homer and the Homeric stories into Latin and into the Roman world. And he's translating at every level. He's translating words at a linguistic level. He's also translating story and transposing the story patterns and beats of the Iliad and the Odyssey into the Roman story of Aeneas and the founding of Rome. He's also translating epic poetry itself from its original oral, spoken Greek context into this written Roman imperial world. And so that act of translation, of taking one thing, understanding the deep underlying meaning, and then taking it into a new context and giving it new clothing and new material, is actually a very profound act that we can do in all sorts of different ways and do every day. We always, all the time, we meet somebody that doesn't have the same background as us, and we have to talk to them and get on their level and find some shared common ground. Well, we have to think about what subjects can we discuss. And sometimes, if I am teaching a class or I'm talking to somebody about what I do, and it's not somebody who has a lot of familiarity with ancient literature or with the stuff that I'm interested in, I'll take the themes and ideas of ancient literature and I'll like transport them and say like, sometimes you see this story theme in like superhero movies or whatever. And that's just another form of translation. It's this basic underlying idea and trying to get at that underlying idea and not be attached to the packaging so much that you can't move that idea into a new context. Even like podcasting versus writing, two totally different media. If I'm going to present the same ideas in a podcast, I'm going to do it differently than if I were to take those same ideas and present them in an essay or a piece of written work, because it's a different medium. That's a form of translation as well. The basic underlying act is you have one object, one work of art or act of expression, one sentence, and you're trying to get under the skin of it and find the deeper meaning, and then you take that meaning and you put it in a new clothing. You put some new gloss or language on it. And so Virgil is doing that all the time. And as I was thinking about it, I was realizing these first three words, famous opening line, book 1, verse 1 of the Aeneid, it's actually an amazing way to study how translation works at a linguistic level, at a thematic level, and also at an artistic level. And each word, arma, virumque, cano, arms, and the man, I sing, each word has a unique and distinctive relationship to Homer that is a form of translation and a different kind of translation, different kind of transformation. Arma, the word warfare, battle, weaponry, war, evokes the Iliad. I've talked about that before. Virum, or wir, man, evokes the Odyssey, because the Odyssey begins with the word aner, man. Cano, I sing, evokes them both, because it's about poetry. This is a form of poetry, and Homer is a singer, but it also moves beyond them and introduces Virgil as an individual who is singing, rather than Homer, who was invoking the muse all the time at the beginning. It's a kind of new character in the poem is Virgil, or the narrative voice that Virgil takes on. And so I want to go through each one of these, see what they can tell us about translation more generally. Always, if you have translation questions, not just related to the Aeneid, but anywhere at all, please write to me. I love collecting them. I love doing these episodes, these little forays into side quests, kind of to supplement what we do on the main show. And you can write into me at rejoiceevermore.substack.com. That's in the description of this episode. It's my Substack. It's where you can support me if you like, to keep this show relatively low not ad free. We do have some sponsors that I really like and enjoy, but I only want to take sponsors that I believe in and like and can endorse. And in order to do that, I have to have other ways of supporting this work. So Rejoice Evermore is a great way to do that. And it's the easiest way to get in touch with me and write in about your questions. So go head over there if you've got translation questions you'd like to ask me. Let's dig in here a little bit, because I've mentioned some of this on the show, but I want to really make clear exactly how this opening line is a work, an act of translation, multiple different works of translation altogether. So just to remind us how this opening works, the translation that I have written myself is, warfare and a man, I sing of the first from the shores of Troy, chased out by fate to Italy and Lavinium, where at last he came ashore. So many things on land and on the deep, under almighty hands, by savage Juno's unforgetting rage he suffered, in war as well, so many things to found a city and bring his gods to Latium, from which the Latin race and Alban fathers and the walls of Rome leapt up. So that's my translation of the opening. We're only going to talk about the first three words. I sing of arms and a man, war and a man, I sing, or warfare and a man, I sing. Okay, so the other two opening lines that this is in conversation with are the Iliad, Menin aede thea Peleia jo Achilleia, sing to me, goddess of the wrath of Peleus' son Achilles. And then Andra moi enne pemusa polutropon hos malapola. That's the opening of the Odyssey. Tell me, muse, about a man of many ways and wanderings. Those are the two different lines, the two different themes, and each one introduces a different poem. And when Virgil picks each word up, he reproduces it. He does give us the Iliad and the Odyssey and the spirit of them both, but he also transforms each one subtly. And it starts with the first word, and this is arma, right? Warfare or battle gear. And it gives all sorts of different ideas. In fact, there are many, many ways to translate this into English. You could say war, you could say weaponry, you could say battle, you could say arms. All of that is a possible translation of the word arma, which literally means weapons. It's like swords and shields and stuff like that. This is a rough, loose analog, not exactly a translation, but a kind of transliteration, or not a transliteration, a transposition of the word menis from the ancient Greek, from the Iliad, which means rage, the rage of Achilles. And so this is a kind of transformation that I think about a lot when I'm doing translation, and that translators often have to think about. And I'm going to talk about each one of these as a different type of transformation. This is the first type of transformation that Virgil does here. He takes the word menis, he transforms it into arma, and this, I think, is transformation by connotation. That is, by bringing in different concepts that are associated with the word. So words, it's kind of often said, words have a denotative and a connotative meaning. The denotative meaning is what the word means. If I say table, it means the object sitting in front of me, or it means all objects like this. And, by no means is denotation a simple thing. We often have to think carefully about what we're denoting with our words, but it's more definite and specific than connotation, which is the stuff that our words brings up, the associations that they carry with them. And one reason why translation is such a delicate business, and why no translation is perfect, is because every word has a different set of connotations, even if it has the same denotation. And this is true even within a particular language. Even if two words are rough, near synonyms in the English language, each one is going to have slightly different connotations. Same denotation means it's a synonym, but different connotations means it's not an exact identical word. So, for example, the words evil and wrong in English are rough synonyms. You can use them to mean the same thing in many different contexts, but they have radically different connotations, a whole different word cloud that each one comes associated with. So if there's some moral failure in the world, I could call it evil or I could call it wrong. And those would both denote the moral failure. If somebody, I don't know, walked up to me on the street and slapped me in the face, I would say that was wrong. Or I might say that was evil. If somebody lied in order to kill a person, to engineer somebody's death, I would say that was evil. That was wrong. And I might be saying both of those words to mean exactly the same thing. And yet, I'm connoting different things with each one. And part of the reason for that is that even though evil and wrong can mean the same thing, they can also mean different things. So evil can mean this dark moral failure. Wrong can also mean just incorrect, not morally incorrect, but incorrect in some other way. And evil can't really mean that. There's no amoral evil. That's a contradiction in terms. There is an amoral wrong, like when I get an answer wrong on a test. And so when I use the word wrong, I'm bringing in all of these connotations of just off. It might be off morally, but it might also be off in a number of other ways, and that lessens the moral blow of the word wrong, even when I'm using it morally. If I say that was wrong, it was wrong to do that, it's not quite as morally strong as that was evil. It was evil to do that. You feel, when I say that, if you're a native speaker of English, I'm sure you can feel that evil is a more powerful moral attack. Even though wrong is also a moral attack, it's diluted by all the different meanings of wrong that we have that aren't moral. Whereas evil is just this primary color in the moral world. It's saturated with moral judgment. It might even, in a word cloud, it might be near to the word sin, right? And sin, of course, is a very powerful and important word for our moral judgments. And so when you're translating within a language, or even from one language to another, connotation means that you're always working with a kind of Venn diagram. There's a Venn diagram, if you think of two circles, and the overlap in the middle is where the translation happens, or the synonym happens, right? Because there is an overlap in the two words, you can find words that mean the same thing, but you can only pick one or the other circle of the Venn diagram at any given time. And so if you start with the right circle of the Venn diagram and you're like, oh, here's another circle that overlaps with that circle, well, now you have all this other stuff from the left side of the Venn diagram, and you lose a lot of stuff from the right side of the Venn diagram, even though you're ending up in the middle. So when you translate, you want the biggest possible overlap in the Venn diagram, but you're never going to get a perfect overlap. And in technical terms, the sphere or the area of the circle in a Venn diagram is called the word's semantic range. The semantic range of the word is like the territory that word is capable of covering. It's like this little domain or area, this territory where the word exists. And if I think of like a simple word like dog, within the semantic range of the word dog are pit bull terriers and golden retrievers, right? They all live within that semantic range, but like canaries are not within the semantic range of the word dog. The English word dog and the French word chien have very, very similar semantic ranges. There's a big, big overlap in that Venn diagram. The Greek word menis and the Latin word arma have like a very thin kind of overlap, which means that each one brings in a huge parcel of concepts that the other one doesn't. And so even though Virgil is very obviously using arma to evoke or to remind us of menis, he's saying warfare, battle gear, battle armor in the beginning of his poem to remind us about a time when when Homer rather said battle fury at the beginning of his poem. He's pulling in, whether he wants to or not, he's also pulling in this other dragnet of concepts that don't come along with menis. So menis means rage, right? It means battle fury. It means a kind of violent anger. And it has all of this stuff in its Venn diagram. On that side of the Venn diagram, we have like emotion, personal investment. And in fact, it turns out that's what the poem is about. It's about Achilles first feeling a personal affront to his honor, and then feeling personal grief over Patroclus, and all of this shapes the course of the war. So I would translate it something like battle fury. I mean, rage is the usual translation, but I think there's a martial element to it, and of course, this is a poem about war. So menis has this big, personal, emotional, one-to-one investment kind of feeling. Arma is almost on the other side. It's like, this other side of the Venn diagram includes all sorts of things that are not personal at all, like weapons, literal objects, right? It is objective in that sense, that we're actually thinking about the gear that goes into war, and we're thinking about these abstractions like warfare or battles, right? Of course, all of those things do also involve personal conflict. They involve emotion, they involve rage even. They have all sorts of things that are tied up with menis. But the overlap is so thin that you're pulling it, you're throwing out a bunch of concepts that are in the Iliad, like that personal investment in the war, and you're bringing in a bunch of concepts that aren't in the Iliad, like this general, large-scale, kind of structural battle seen from the 1,000-foot view. And actually, I would argue that it turns out that was a really smart choice on Virgil's part, because one of the things about Aeneas is that he is not really a fighter. He fights, but not because he likes fighting or because he's personally angry so much as Achilles is, and more because this is what he has to do. This is part of the structure of his journey. So the impersonal nature of the war that Aeneas is thrust into in the second half of the poem actually fits with arma in a way that it doesn't fit with menis. That level of thought, I guarantee you, went into the use of the word arma. That one first word of this poem had all of that thought behind it and more when Virgil used it. It's especially important because it is the first word of the poem, but at every turn, Virgil is thinking at that level. He's writing, taking great care. Donatus, the biographer of Virgil, says he took the greatest possible pains with this poem. And the more you think about it, the more you realize, oh, that's actually true. Like, all of these words are very carefully chosen. So that's one kind of translation or transformation you can perform to a word, is that connotation, the overlap and the not overlap of the connotation, the Venn diagram type transformation. With the next word, virumque, we get a different kind of transformation. So vir, like I say, translates onair, and those are very close synonyms. The word onair in Greek is the closest thing that is available to the word vir in Latin, and virumque, the accusative form, with the enclitic and. An enclitic is a word that you stick on the end, and que is a little enclitic that adds, that is just put on the end and it just means and. So the main word is virum, and then you have virumque to do the and, which is important because Virgil's telling you I have two subjects, not just one. You only get one per Homeric poem, but you get two in this Virgilian epic. This is another type of translation that I think of as transformation by juxtaposition. That is, which words are surrounding the word. So these two words, for all intents and purposes, on their own, aner and vir, are the same word. I mean, I know that I talk a lot about no two words are really the same, but like, this is as close as you can get to the same parcel of concepts. It's a very, very thin sliver of not overlapping Venn diagram here. So we're not really doing a lot of translation or transformation by the connotations of the word, but the word, even though it means the same thing, changes based on the other words that it is next to. So in the Odyssey, aner, andra in the accusative form, is the first word. So it's introduced basically with a kind of blank slate. It's like this could be any kind of man. We could be using this word in any kind of way. And we're waiting for the rest of the words to tell us more information. So it's almost like a mystery, which is very smart on Homer's part, because of course the whole poem is about the mystery of Odysseus. He's not named until many lines down. 21 lines go by without Odysseus being named. We're left to wonder, we're invited to wonder, who is this man? Who is this man? What sort of devil is he to have me caught in a trap and choose to let me go free? That's another musical theater nerd reference for those of you out there that are Les Mis fans, but genuinely, who is this man? We're being asked when we are introduced to the aner of the Odyssey. Well, we know a little bit. We know that he's somebody worth talking about because we're asking the muse to tell us about this man. The gods take an interest in him, perhaps. But it's really not until polutropos, andra moi enne pemusa polutropon, that we get any information about this guy at all. And then the information we get is he's twisty-turny. He's a man of many ways and wanderings. And this is, again, by design, and it places a ton of weight on polutropos that makes that word one of the most important words in the opening line, if not the most important, because everything else up until this point has been a little bit open and generic, and we haven't quite known what to make of it yet. Then when polutropos comes in, it's like, oh, that's really important. This is a thing that we're going to care about for the whole journey, and in fact, it's true. And it also doesn't resolve a lot of the mysteries. In fact, it entangles them more deeply and makes that adjective even more forceful because it invites us further into this mystery of who is this guy. And that's, again, what the whole poem is about. None of that is true in the Aeneid. Everything is different in the Aeneid because we've already had the first word, which is arma. So the fact that this word comes, the word virum, comes second in the sentence changes its meaning, even its connotations, or at least the connotations that we think of are changed by the fact that arma has already come first. If I say to you, tell me about a man, that's a totally different thing than if I say, I sing of war and a man. The word man almost means something completely different. When I say war and a man, instantly I'm like, oh, this is a man, right? This is a man of war. And we've got all sorts of images of this guy with a sword in his hand, battle ready, battle hungry even. And, Aeneas, when we first meet him, is really kind of not like that. He's actually quite despondent and afraid and weak and small. But the fact that he's been put next to arma at the beginning means that we expect him to become a man of war, or at least a man capable of waging war. And in fact, that does ultimately become true throughout the poem. It introduces this whole other element of intrigue, and it asks the question, what happens if you put an Iliadic, a man destined for Iliadic heroism, into an Odyssean journey? So juxtaposition, the words that come next to each other and the order in which they come, also change the meaning of the words, even if we don't use word order to convey the grammar of a sentence the way we do in English. The fact that these words come in a different order changes their meaning. And that's something that translators have to think about too, right? In English, I have to rearrange the order of words when I translate from Latin or Greek, or really from any other language. I'm going to have to rearrange some words. that's going to change the meaning in subtle ways. It's going to change the associations and the juxtapositions that come into play. Then finally, we have this third word, cano, I sing. And this is the word that functions in the place of ennepe and aede in the Greek epics. And right off the bat, there's a grammatical difference here, which is that ennepe and aede are both imperatives. They're commands. Please sing to me. Tell me, muse. There's a position of supplication on the poet's part that he's waiting for the divine inspiration. He's waiting for the goddess to give him an authoritative account. Cano is a first person present active verb. I am singing. Here I am singing. This is me, Virgil. And so Virgil has stepped front and center with this word in a way that Homer did not. And in fact, Homer generally does not put himself front and center. Virgil's very self-conscious and wants us to see him singing or, in fact, writing. Because this is a kind of transformation, a kind of change that I think of as transformation by context. That is, the context of the poem itself, the situation in which the poem is written. The things we know about the history of the poem changes the meaning of words. Even words that would otherwise mean something different can take on new meanings based on the person who's writing them and why they're writing them and how and what we know about this person. There's a wonderful story by Borges, this great short story writer, called Pierre Menard, author of Don Quixote. And of course, Don Quixote was not written by Pierre Menard originally, it was written by Cervantes, but the story is about this guy Pierre Menard who sets out to write word for word Don Quixote, the same novel, every word in the same position. But because he's Pierre Menard, because he's a modern person, because he lives later than Cervantes, every word means something different in this context, in the context of the novel already having been written by Cervantes, in the context of all the history that has changed, and his whole journey, it's very funny. His whole journey is to like summon up the inner experience that would produce authentically from him the same sequence of words that Cervantes created, but it's a totally different novel. It means something completely different. And this is Borges' kind of thought experiment about context, the larger historical context of a work. Here, we can see how much that changes things. When Virgil says, cano, I sing, he's saying something extremely smart and canny, because on the one hand, he is associating himself with Homer. And he's saying, I am a singer just like Homer. In fact, maybe I'm even a more important singer because I am telling you that I'm here. I'm not just waiting on divine inspiration. I'm actually taking my position in the poem. But I'm also not actually singing. So I'm necessarily a kind of imitator because cano, I sing, is not true. He's writing. This is a written poem, and we've moved beyond the time when Homeric poets would just chant and sing in a performance context. And so the context in which he's doing this also raises questions. Well, actually, is Virgil worse? Is he not able to live up to this task? On the one hand, he's putting himself forward. He's like really backing himself and saying, I am singing, not the muse. On the other hand, he's inviting us to ask, well, like, what business do you have here, in fact? What right do you have to involve yourself and to put yourself in the position of Homer, the great singer, when you are just a writer, a much later, arrival on the scene? And then down the road, we get an invocation of the goddess. So he then says, "O goddess, tell me about the rage of Juno, the queen of the gods." And so he introduces this whole other register where it's like some of this poem is divinely inspired. There is an area where I can invoke the muse and I can ask her to tell me about the gods. And so suddenly Virgil, by waiting to introduce the muse and by putting himself first, has created two totally distinct registers in the poem. There are these two layers to it. Some of this poem is me, little old Virgil, entering into the role of Homer, trying to fill Homer's shoes. And some of it is the gods delivering their plan for Rome, working out destiny and fate. And of course, that's what the poem itself is about. It's about this one guy, this schlubby little dude, Aeneas, who has to fill this giant role and carry on his shoulders all the history, everything that went before, all this other stuff. Like, how is he going to do it? And how much of the poem is divinely inspired and how much of it is just some guy called Virgil, like, giving his opinion. So suddenly this space opens up with the word cano that transforms, using the context, by juxtaposing the context of cano to the context of ennepe and Aede, Homer, or rather Virgil, is opening up this whole space of irony and commentary and ambiguity, where we don't ever totally know, like, are we in the world of absolute divine truth and glowing immortal glory, or are we in the world of like human opinion and different political agendas and one guy who has obligations at court to tell this story? And that is what makes this particular poem so endlessly fascinating and dense, even though it's so much shorter. It's like every word is subject to many possible interpretations, is related, self-consciously related to like every other word that has ever been written in ancient literature up until this point. And I mean, again, I know that Virgil, some people don't like Virgil as much. You know, I love Virgil more every time I come back to him, even though I am at heart a Homerist. And one reason for that is like, there's no amount of scrutiny you can give to Virgil that isn't repaid, and there's no amount of scrutiny you can give to language and translation that won't be repaid. So we talked today about 3 different kinds of change and transformation that can happen from word to word. One is the different connotations that come with different words, the different associations that each word carries with it, even within one language. The other is the juxtaposition of word order, the way that words affect one another depending on which one comes first, which one comes second, and all of that. And the other is the context in which the words are used, the person who is speaking, the age of the edition, the era when this is happening, and what's going on politically, historically around it. All of that can change the meaning of words as well. Doesn't mean that words have no meaning or that the meaning is endlessly fluid. In fact, words do have meaning. That's why communication and translation are possible. But all of these different shades can affect the meaning and can change the way we understand the language and one another. This is one of those things, there's a wonderful phrase about the Gospels that I love to bring up all the time, and that is the Gospels are shallow enough for a child to play in and deep enough for an elephant to drown in. So I don't want to give you the impression that like you have to know all of this stuff in order to appreciate any of this literature. Like a lot of it is just great storytelling, fascinating history, great myths, whatever. But as deep as you want to go, the poem will take you there. There's just like no end to the depths that you can get into as you like unpack and pick some of this stuff apart. To which end, send me your questions. Anything you're interested in knowing, especially about language, especially about translation for these Words episodes, I'd love to hear about it. You can write into me at rejoiceevermore.substack.com. You can subscribe to this podcast wherever you get your podcasts, and you can tell your friends about it anytime you want. I will see you next time for more truth, beauty, and the stuff that matters.